Hey, I'm Gary Streigler, and this is part 2 of our 3-part series on how to make this table. Again, a project anyone at any skill level as a woodworker can conquer. And last episode we showed you how to make the top. In this episode, we're going to show you how to make these legs. You wouldn't think that you could get confused doing that, but I learned pretty quickly that I wanted to take a pencil and make a mark on each face so that I would know I either have or haven't jointed that side, and that was running over the joiner to remove the saw curves and get everything squared up. Now, don't need to worry if you don't happen to own a really nice jointer. You can actually make a jig, which is just simply a piece of MDF or something for your table saw that has a straight edge over here. Let me see if I can just mock this up real quick. So imagine that this was going to go against the face of my table saw, and if I just put a fence right there, then when I ran this past the table saw, it's going to automatically give me a straight edge here and get rid of any cupping or anything. I would have to go back and do more sanding, but again, you don't have to I'm so thankful I have this big joiner, but you don't have to have all the equipment to build this table. So here's the jig that I used to put the tapers on the end of my leg. Couple of things. It's 11 5/8 wide. There's nothing sacred about that, but what I liked about that is that it kept my hands a long way away from the table saw blade. And then the amount of taper that it has, the piece that I'm tapering is about 23 3/4 long. I cut my material to 24, actually I cut my pieces a little longer than 48 so I could kind of glue 2 together at one time. And then I went back and cut them to 23 3/4 so that I could taper them with this jig. And I'm eventually going to even take a little bit more if I get them to final length. But at any rate, from this point, it's about 8 5/8. 8 5/8 over to where this piece is. And back here where I put this stop, which the stop is super important, it's 7 1/2. So it's tapered about 1 1/8. These pieces are just pieces of wood that I ripped on a 45, so that when the piece sits in here, it's oriented 90 degrees to the saw blade. You know, there are lots of jigs, and I think I've even shared it. There are jigs that you can do which instead of having it at 90 degrees, if you just rip it flat, you get a tapered leg, and that's a good look too, but I wanted to share something different. So, now, what I do need to say, this blade is a 10-inch table saw blade. It is cranked up as tall as I can possibly go. I used a piece of 3/4 for this, but it might be a better idea to get a good piece of either 1/2-inch plywood or MDF, because I am absolutely at the top limits of what I can cut. Now, it is super important as we get ready to do this to know where the on-off switch on your table saw is. Most table saws, that switch is going to be easy to find. I can literally hit this switch with my leg and turn it off, because once I push the piece totally through, I'm going to turn it off and wait for the blade to completely stop before I move it. As long as I'm sure that this piece is nested totally down in there, I'm going to get the accurate same cut every time. By running it through a joiner, or if you did it on a table saw, you got these pieces to where they're perfectly square. Well, nothing's perfect, but very, very close to square. again, I would tell you, you can make this table with any kind of leg. And, if you're uncomfortable doing this kind of a trick on the leg, you might go for the one where you make a taper like this, or simply leave them square. One of the things I always want to say when I'm teaching anything about woodworking, I actually want to taper it this way, is, man, if you see me doing something that you're uncomfortable with, don't do it. It is key. Got to keep this edge against the fence and keep this down tight, but my hands are never going to get close to the blade. One other thing that I kind of want to share at this point, making a really little odd-shaped piece. If you happen to have a really big hole in your table saw throat plate, you might want to make a zero clearance plate, and I did a video on that too if you'll just check out my YouTube channel. All right, enough talk. I'm just going to rotate this like so. Again, critical to keep it against the stop, over against the fence, nested down in my cradle. Well, I think that's all of them. Now, I've sort of talked about the fact that I glued this up out of 2 pieces of 1.5 thick pine, and because of that, I had a lot of extra material to get it totally flat and totally square, and that is super important. This ends up being, let me throw a tape measure on here. So this is 2 5/16 by 2 5/16. So, if you're going to try and use this jig like I've done, that's probably important to you. There's nothing sacred about what I did, but what I would suggest is make one extra leg, and that first one's what you're going to use to experiment to make sure that you get, the taper that you want. And it's way better to maybe start with this fence over a little bit and be a little less aggressive. I actually, if you looked at my jig, I started there and I said I want more taper. So I did one there again, more taper still, till I ended up where I'm at. So, just by pivoting this piece over, I'm getting more and more taper. So, again, hopefully this doesn't seem to be too challenging. I think anyone can do it as long as they're careful. I don't think my fingers ever got anywhere close to the table saw. I do use a really good, although it's not super expensive, Joinery 50-tooth combination blade on my table saw, and honestly, I can barely even tell that there's a saw kerf there. But 2 more things I want to do to get to my finished leg. One, I'm going to take it to the miter saw where I've got a stop set, cut it to my final length, and then as part of the assembly, I'm going to drill a couple pocket holes. We're going to take a look at how I did that. So there's several things going to be showing you that add to the strength of the table, that make it to where these legs are really rock solid. The first one is we're going to use some of these, which I think are about 2.5 inch long Craig screws, to drive up into the bottom of the table. And I'm only going to do that on 2 sides, because for each table leg, there's 2 sides that are kind of the face sides that you're going to see. I've got a little bit of a knot here, so that's definitely one of the sides I want to have turned in. Unless, you know, I mean, some people like character. There's going to be a little bit of character in the top. And if you don't like knots at all, I mean, just probably get an extra board and, you know, be a little more picky about how you cut it. So this is a jig that Craig sells, and I did some testing. Remember, I asked you to make that extra leg just so you can do testing. But I've got it set up so that when I drill it and this screw comes through an angle like that, it's going to be coming up a little over 1 inch, because I don't want to come any closer than that, or it might tend to poke through the top, which is a bad look. So this jig is just designed to where you can lock it distance from the end. You could actually take just the block out of one of the L-shaped Craig jigs and clamp it to the top if you want to, but this is a great jig. I use it all the time, and I'm pretty confident they still make it. So I'm going to use this hole. Okay, I better get back to, yeah. There's that side with a knot. And I'm just going to slide this up till that end piece hits, get about centered. And I'm taking a clamp on thinner pieces. This is actually designed for one of their face frame clamps. And if you got the really big face frame clamp, you can still use it, but I found that this Bessie clamp works great. Okay, so again, I set this stop collar deeper than I normally would, because most of the time I'm just going through 3/4 thick material. That all gets back to having a scrap or an extra leg and practicing on it. That's the first one. Now, I could either put it here or here. It doesn't really matter, but you want to have it on, I don't even know what the word would be, but just rotate it 90 degrees, because that way, again, your 2 show faces will still be good. All right. Okay, now I didn't do my sanding on this yet, because again, my faithful top that I've had for about 6 months now is starting to get a little rough spots. Maybe I should sand it, but I'm just going to wait. I waited to do my final sanding with a random orbit sander until I was through with all the other steps. So this table leg's now ready to assemble, and again, you could do all sorts of different designs. I just want to show something different. You know, if you're not comfortable doing that with a table saw, I mean, you could even simply take a round over bit and just round over the edges. But if you do that, make sure, because you're going to see later on how I put the apron pieces in here. If you were rounding these corners over, you'd want to make sure that you didn't round over the corners where the apron pieces are going to hit. And that's going to make a lot more sense when you watch the next video, which is the grand finale, how we take our tabletop, our legs, and the apron pieces and put them all together to get a table.